Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my Endless Diary Tales channel? Thank you so much. My mother's fiancé was George, a powerful figure in the elite circles of the wealthy. They met when they had nothing, struggling together through countless hardships. Yet just when they were about to finally unite in marriage, my mother and I were sold to a foreign land. To protect me, she was blinded, her spine shattered. By the time she died, there wasn't a single inch of unscathed flesh left on her body. When George arrived, he was only in time to save the terrified, trembling version of me. I handed him one of my mother's severed fingers. On it, stained with blood, was the engagement ring he had personally placed on her hand. I watched as he ripped off the Buddhist prayer beads from his wrist. At that moment he fell into darkness, completely consumed by vengeance. Chapter 1. When those people came after us, my mother used the last of her strength to hide me in a foul-smelling garbage pile. The last thing she ever said to me was, "David, stay hidden. Don't make a sound. No matter what happens, don't come out. Wait for your father to save you." After speaking, she blindly reached out and held me, cupping my face as she placed a firm, desperate kiss on my forehead. Her eyes were nothing but two hollow bleeding holes. Every bone in her body had been broken. She could no longer take me and run. I did as she told me, covering my mouth tightly, not daring to make a sound. Her screams echoed in my ears, each one more heart-wrenching than the last. I was trembling all over, my tears streaming endlessly, yet I didn't dare let a single sob escape. In the end, her voice failed her, and the blows finally stopped. Through the narrow gaps of my hiding place, I saw her body, bloodied, mangled, still struggling to move across the ground. Her broken fingers fumbled desperately, searching. Finally, it seemed like she found what she was looking for. With the last ounce of her strength, she slipped the ring back onto her severed finger. The next moment, I watched as those people stepped toward her again, knives in hand. One by one, they severed her fingers. They laughed, cruel, inhuman laughter. I didn't cry. I only opened my eyes wider, burning their faces into my memory one by one. Chapter 2. I didn't listen to my mother. After those people set her body on fire and left, I crawled out from the garbage pile. Just before dawn, I found the only remaining piece of her, one severed finger. On it was a ring soaked in blood. I recognized that ring. Every time my mother showed it to me, she would smile so sweetly. She used to say, "This was the first thing your father bought for me with his hard-earned money. It was cheap, but it's my most precious treasure." Later, my father became wealthy, so wealthy that he could buy her endless jewelry and precious stones. But the only ring she ever wore was that simple silver band. Even in death, with her last breath, she had been desperately searching for it. So I had to deliver this ring into my father's hands. I pressed my mother's severed finger against my chest, hiding it close to my heart, then crawled back into the garbage pile. When George finally dug me out, I was covered in filth, reeking of decay. My face was so dirty it was unrecognizable. Yet his bloodshot eyes locked onto me, and he pulled me into his arms, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. "David." His voice trembled as he called my name. "Daddy is taking you home." I didn't cry. I simply reached into my pocket, took out my mother's severed finger, and handed it to him. "Mom was burned away. This is all that's left of her," I said. My eyes were wide, my tears welling up, but I bit down hard, refusing to let them fall. George clenched his jaw so tightly that his cheekbones protruded, his temples throbbing with the effort to suppress his emotions. But in the end, as he touched that severed finger, as his fingers traced the blood-stained ring that had lost its former luster, great heavy tears crashed down onto my face. "David," he rasped, voice hoarse, "we're bringing Mom home." Carefully, he tucked my mother's finger against his chest, securing it as if it were the most sacred thing in the world. Then he picked me up in his arms. But as he tried to stand, his knees buckled and he collapsed to the ground. I heard his voice, raw and shattered, crying out my mother's name. With one fierce yank, the prayer beads around his wrist snapped apart, scattering in all directions. "Willow." He whispered my mother's name once more. And when he finally stood again, I saw his blood-red eyes. At that moment I knew he had become a demon. Chapter 3. After we returned home, George never let me leave his sight. I had witnessed my mother being beaten to death with my own eyes. I was so traumatized that I stopped speaking entirely. George built a cenotaph for her. But after the burial, he never visited it again. The severed finger, however, he kept, preserved carefully, always carried close to him. Even after my mother's death, women still fought over the position of George's wife. My maternal grandfather sent my aunt over. She was my mother's half-sister. The moment she saw me, she broke down in tears, holding me so tightly she wouldn't let go. She cried, "Poor David, so young and already without a mother. What will he do now?" My grandfather added, "A true aunt is better than an outsider coming in and mistreating David." My aunt shyly tightened her hold on me, then stole a glance at George. The admiration in her eyes was impossible to hide. She said, "Brother-in-law, I just feel sorry for David. And for my sister. I only want to take care of him in her place." I turned to look at George as well. He sat on the sofa, expression cold and indifferent, as if nothing in the world could stir his emotions. His fingers idly played with the new string of prayer beads on his wrist. For a long time he said nothing. Then finally he nodded. "Then stay and take care of David." When my mother's best friend, Alicia, found out that George had allowed my aunt to stay, she stormed into the house furious. She accused him of being heartless. "Willow's body isn't even cold yet, and you're already bringing in someone new." Even if she's David's aunt, Willow never had much contact with them when she was alive. How sincere could she possibly be? "I don't trust her. If you insist on marrying someone else, then I'll take David with me." George stood behind his desk, tall and composed. The loose sleeves of his crisp shirt revealed his slender wrist adorned with a string of prayer beads. His fingers played with the beads as he lifted his gaze to Alicia. The faint light from the window slanted in, casting dappled shadows across his sharp features. For a moment Alicia seemed lost, her breath hitching as she stared at him. George spoke, his voice calm and unwavering. "If you're truly worried about David, then why not stay and take care of him yourself?" Alicia stammered, her words caught in her throat. But her face turned bright red. The anger that had been burning in her moments ago seemed to vanish in an instant. She muttered, Then I'll stay for a few days. At least until David settles in." And so Alicia stayed too. That night, I overheard the servants whispering. My aunt was furious, so much so that she locked herself in her room and spent the entire night smashing things. Chapter 4. I didn't like my aunt. When my mother was struggling to get by, my grandfather's family never even looked our way. It was only after my father was reclaimed by the Wong family that they shamelessly came knocking at our door. My mother was kind and soft-hearted, but I took after George's cold and indifferent nature. After all, even though I was young, I remembered everything clearly. I remembered my grandfather calling me useless just because I spoke late. I remembered my aunt sneering that I looked exactly like my father, and would grow up to be just as heartless as him. None of them were good people. I wasn't particularly fond of Alicia either, even though she had been one of my mother's closest friends. When my father was poor, she had urged my mother to break up with him, saying he wasn't good enough for her. Yet behind my mother's back, she secretly brought him chicken soup and slipped him money. Later, when my father returned to the Wong family, she had whispered fears into my mother's ears, warning her that now that he was wealthy, he would surely leave her behind, that he would never marry her. My mother had believed it. She cried in secret over and over again. Once she even packed our bags in silence and took me away. My father had searched for us tirelessly, staying awake for days and nights until he finally found us. When he did, he held my mother so tightly he wouldn't let go. After that, their marriage was set in stone. Because he was determined to marry my mother, my father had knelt for 3 days and 3 nights, passing out multiple times. Only then did the rigid traditional elders of the Wong family finally give their reluctant approval. But the one I liked the most was my mother's other best friend, Maria, the gentlest and kindest lady of the elite circles. She had been my mother's roommate in college. She had never once looked down on my mother for being poor. When my mother gave birth to me, my parents barely had any money and could only afford a cheap hospital. It was Aunt Maria who paid to transfer my mother to the best hospital available. She even covered the cost of the most expensive postpartum care center for her. And now my mother was gone. All the women outside were scrambling to become my stepmother. Only Aunt Maria, upon hearing the news, she fainted from grief and was still in the hospital. George took me to visit her. When I saw her, I was stunned. She looked so thin, so frail, her eyes red and swollen from endless crying. The moment she saw me, tears poured down her face as she held me tightly, unwilling to let go. George sat beside us, watching as Maria and I clung to each other, sobbing. His own eyes grew damp. When we had cried enough, Maria gently sent me off to wash my face and eat some snacks. Then she turned to George and asked, "Have you found everyone involved in hurting Willow?" George replied, "The ones who carried it out have been dealt with, but the mastermind is still unknown." Maria was silent for a moment before saying, "Willow disappeared after being invited out by Miss Anna Sue for lunch and shopping. George, Anna Sue was once the woman your father chose for you to marry. Do you think?" George's expression turned ice cold. "There's no evidence yet." Maria's voice remained soft, but her words carried weight. "The Sue family has businesses all across Southeast Asia, in both the legal and the criminal world." George fingered his prayer beads, letting out a slow, bitter chuckle. "Yes, the Sue family is powerful." Maria bit her lip before suggesting, "George, why not form an alliance with my family, the Kim family?" As she spoke, fresh tears welled up in her eyes. She continued, "If our families join forces, your power will grow stronger, and you'll be able to avenge Willow sooner. Once you've avenged her, we can divorce. My only wish will have been fulfilled." Her words were filled with devotion, spoken with absolute sincerity. Even as I stood outside the door, I was deeply moved, and when I looked at George, I saw that he too was wavering. He murmured, "But Maria, this would be too unfair to you." Chapter 5. Maria replied softly, "I have known Willow for nearly 10 years. We were not sisters by blood, but we were closer than family. The way she died so horribly." Her voice choked up, unable to continue. She looked at George and said, "If I cannot do something for her, I will never be at peace for the rest of my life." Faced with those clear, sincere eyes, untainted, filled with pure kindness, it seemed impossible for anyone to refuse her. I too thought he would agree. After all, he had only just returned to the Wong family. His position was unstable. Though he had endless wealth, he had neither power nor influence. If he married Maria, the beloved daughter of the prestigious Kim family, everything would change overnight. His standing within the Wong family would become unshakable. But George refused. He stood up. From my place behind the door, I could only see his slender back. I couldn't see his expression. Maria's cheeks turned a faint shade of red. George's voice was calm, distant. "This is unnecessary, and unfair to you, to say the least. If I were to marry someone else, even in death, I would have no face to see Willow again." "George." Maria was stunned. She hadn't expected him to say that. George raised a hand, stopping her from speaking further. "I understand that you're doing this for Willow, and I appreciate it." Maria lowered her eyes, tears slipping silently down her face. George told her to rest well, then turned and walked out. As he stepped outside, he casually lifted me into his arms. He carried me all the way home, back to the small house where the three of us had lived for 5 years. He cooked me lunch, 1 dish of meat, 1 of vegetables, and a bowl of soup. After eating, we rested on the balcony's lounge chair just as we had in the past when my mother was still alive. "David." He stroked my hair, his gaze gentle and warm. I lay in his arms. I didn't know how much time had passed when I suddenly felt a damp patch on my back. I tried to lift my head to look at him, but his large hand pressed firmly against the back of my head, keeping me close. I knew. He was crying again. After barely 3 days of peaceful coexistence, my aunt and Alicia finally couldn't hold back. They got into a heated argument that quickly escalated into a physical fight. By the end of it, my aunt had lost a handful of hair, and Alicia's face was scratched. I was so frightened that I hid in a cupboard and refused to come out. George was furious. Both my aunt and Alicia were thrown out. After all, they were here to take care of me, yet they had only worsened my condition. Even my grandfather didn't dare protest. Alicia, knowing she was in the wrong, stayed quiet for a while. 3 months after my mother's death, the elders of the Wong family began pressuring George to remarry and have children. They said, "Getting married isn't just about you. It's for your older brother and for the entire Wang family. The more children, the better. You should have at least 3 sons. And David must be adopted into your brother's lineage. Your poor elder brother. His health is fragile and he refuses to marry because he doesn't want to ruin some young girl's future. But as elders, we cannot allow our family line to end. The Su family has graciously overlooked your past and David's existence. They're still willing to have Anna marry you. Pick a date and finalize the engagement. Back then, George had knelt for 3 days and 3 nights just to marry my mother. The Wang family had a sickly eldest son. They had feared that this long-lost younger son might also be weak or sickly. So they had grudgingly agreed to the marriage. But now that my mother was dead, Anna was unwilling to give up. She wanted to marry into the Wang family, wanted to become my stepmother. A distant memory stirred in my mind. Anna had always been a spoiled little princess. She had met my mother through Maria, acting as though she wanted to befriend her. My mother had a soft heart and was easily swayed. She had no sense of self-preservation and gradually became close to Anna, going out with her often. One night, Anna finally lost patience and revealed her true intentions. At first, she had tried to persuade my mother to leave George willingly. But when my mother refused, she turned vicious. Willow, don't be stupid. Don't force me to use other means. I'm warning you, nobody's like you are disposable. I could crush 10 of you with a single slap. If you don't break up with George, I'll have you sold overseas. I'm telling you now, the traffickers over there are brutal. They won't just kill you. They'll strip you of everything, even your organs. I vaguely remembered Anna's face that night, her snarling, arrogant expression. But my mother hadn't been afraid at all. She had just smiled, foolishly, softly, as if she hadn't heard a single threat. Chapter 6. For some reason, I had always thought Anna was just another foolish, spoiled rich girl. She acted tough, but deep down she seemed weak. I remembered one time when my mother took me out to play. A hideous bug had flown in from somewhere and landed on Anna's designer handbag. She screamed so loudly that the whole house nearly collapsed, and she almost fainted on the spot. My mother had simply walked up and smacked the bug dead with her bare hand. Anna had stared at the squashed insect, trembling uncontrollably before collapsing completely. It wasn't that I underestimated her intelligence or ability, but honestly, someone like her didn't seem capable of orchestrating something so cruel. Of course, whether the Su family had been involved was another matter entirely. After the Wang family started pressuring my father to remarry, he took me to meet Anna. I hadn't expected to see her in such a state. It was as if a once vibrant flower had suddenly withered from lack of water. She looked gaunt, lifeless, her entire being dulled. Her once bright eyes were now murky and vacant. But the moment she saw me, her gaze sharpened. If George hadn't stopped her, she would have lunged straight at me. I was startled, and George's expression darkened. Then, out of nowhere, Anna dropped to her knees with a loud thud. Wang. Mr. Wang. She grabbed onto my father's pant leg, refusing to let go. George hadn't even had the chance to step back before Anna's face twisted, and she burst into tears. She sobbed. Willow visits me every night. The moment I fall asleep, she's there. She keeps blaming me, saying I was the one who had her sold overseas. She resents me. She haunts me every night. For 3 months, I haven't had a single good night's sleep. I keep begging her, but nothing works. Finally, she relented on one condition. I had to swear to protect David. She told me that David and you are surrounded by dangerous people, and she's terrified. She said my family is the only one she knows with connections to the underworld. And she warned me, if I fail to keep David safe, if he so much as loses a single strand of hair, she'll come for me. Anna collapsed onto the floor, wailing. I swore over and over again, and only then did she finally leave me alone. Mr. Wang, I'm begging you. I can't take it anymore. I stared at Anna, utterly speechless. George also watched her in silence. Then he asked, so this marriage arrangement, was it your idea? Anna nodded immediately. Yes. I threw a tantrum until my father agreed. George's next question was quiet but sharp. Anna, do you love me? Anna's head shook so violently it was almost comical. She waved her hands frantically as if she were facing a terrifying beast. I don't love you, George. I wouldn't dare. I swear I wouldn't dare. George ran his fingers over his prayer beads, then spoke calmly. Marriage is impossible. But you may move into the Wong household as my fiancé to take care of David. Anna's face lit up. Then George added, for only 1 year. He didn't look at Anna when he said it. Instead, his gaze fell on me. Then he reached out and ruffled my hair, his voice steady. David, trust me. You only need to wait for 1 year. 6 months after my mother's death, rumors of George and Anna's engagement began to circulate. That same night, Maria Kim spent the entire evening at my mother's grave. Her family searched for her frantically, worried sick. When they asked George, he went to the cemetery and found her. By then, she had collapsed from exhaustion, unconscious in his arms. When she woke up, her eyes were full of tears as she looked at George. You know the Sue family is the prime suspect, she whispered. Yet you're still going to marry Anna Sue. Where's that honor you always spoke of? Won't you regret this when you see Willow again in the afterlife? George's gaze was indifferent. The Sue family is powerful. It's a temporary measure. Maria's voice trembled. I told you. I can help you. George said. Maria, it's not just about gaining power. I simply can't stand watching Anna continue living like a pampered princess. I can't stand seeing her enjoy her luxurious life untouched by consequences. She wants to marry me so badly. Then I'll grant her wish. Tell me, what could be more satisfying than keeping her by my side day and night, making her suffer? Maria's tense expression gradually softened. So, this is revenge? She asked. George nodded. Yes. George. Maria couldn't hold back any longer. She reached out and gently grasped his hand. You're truly suffering too much, she murmured. Having to play along with someone as ridiculous as Anna. It's beneath you. For the first time, George didn't pull his hand away. Instead, he simply said, what choice do I have? Right now, I am still under someone's thumb. Maria gazed at him, and for the first time, the pain in her eyes was overwhelming. Chapter 7. As the anniversary of my mother's death approached, George finally took full control of the Wong family, stepping into the very center of the elite world. With the Sue family backing him, and the Sue family's deep ties to the underworld, his hands could no longer be considered clean. Those around him grew increasingly cautious, not daring to make a single misstep. Even I, as his son, sometimes found myself afraid when I looked at his expressionless face, when a single indifferent sentence from him could decide the fate of multiple lives. The George who had once loved my mother with such warmth, the gentle and peaceful man I had known, he was gone. Completely. A week before my mother's death anniversary, George's new company overseas was set to launch. He decided to take Anna and me with him to Country F. The night before our departure, he called Maria. The show is about to begin, Marita, he said. Would you like to come with us? On the other end of the line, Maria laughed freely. Of course, George, she replied. I'll go with you. Somewhere in the past 6 months, Maria had become Marita when he spoke to her. And in the business world, Maria had poured her heart and soul into his endeavors, scheming and strategizing on his behalf. Sometimes, when I sat alone in a daze, I wondered if I had to have a stepmother. My mother would probably have chosen Maria. She seemed flawless, so perfect that not a single fault could be found in her. Even George, over this past year, had gradually opened his heart to her, hadn't he? The day we arrived in Country F, it rained heavily. By the afternoon, the storm had passed, leaving behind a sky of burning clouds. George lifted me into his arms and stood there, gazing out at the sky that looked as though it had been set ablaze. I knew what he was thinking. He was thinking about my mother. I was too. I remembered the fire that night. I remembered the moment the flames consumed her. I remembered her final agonized scream. I tilted my head to look up at George. His eyes were red. So red that I couldn't tell if it was from the reflection of the fiery sky or from something much deeper. On the third night, George told Maria that there would be a banquet that evening. Maria understood. She knew. Tonight everything would come to an end. Stylists and makeup artists brought in racks upon racks of exquisite gowns. In the end, Maria chose a deep red floor-length mermaid gown with a long train. The banquet was to be held aboard a luxury cruise ship. As Maria stepped onto the ship, the heel of her stiletto got caught in the gangway's metal grating and snapped. A strange sense of unease crept over her. The ship was ablaze with lights, but outside on the deck, men in black stood armed, bodyguards and mercenaries stationed at every corner. For the briefest moment, Maria hesitated. She had an impulse to turn back. Then George appeared. He was dressed in a long black trench coat, the suit underneath a matching shade of midnight. Tall and elegant, he exuded an effortless charm. He lowered his gaze to Maria, his lips curling into the faintest unreadable smile. "Maria," he said, his voice smooth and steady. "Come here." As if under a spell, Maria lifted the hem of her gown and took one step forward. Then another. And another. Barefoot, she ascended the gangway, one step at a time toward him. Chapter 8. Maria extended her hand toward him, but George didn't take it. Between his fingers a cigarette smoldered, its smoke curling softly into the night air. "Go change your shoes," George said. "I'll finish this cigarette first." Maria hesitated but eventually turned and left. George leaned against the railing of the ship, gazing out at the endless expanse of water. With each slow inhale, he smoked in complete silence. When only the ember remained, he finally lowered his eyes. His gaze landed on the wedding ring on his fourth finger. And then softly he whispered, "Willow." His fingers brushed over the ring, and for the first time in a long while, his features softened with tenderness. "Bless me," he murmured. "Let everything go smoothly." Many years later, I would still remember that night with perfect clarity. George hadn't shielded me from the bloodshed. I was 6 years old, but my childhood had already ended long before that night. Maria, now dressed elegantly, stepped into the grand banquet hall. Her eyes swept the room and she hesitated. "Why are there so few people?" The moment the words left her lips, she froze. Because the people inside weren't foreign dignitaries from country F. Almost every single one of them was someone she knew. Her eyes first landed on Alicia, then on my aunt, my grandfather. Her expression began to shift. Her body tensed, instinctively moving to retreat, only to find the way behind her blocked by security. Then, with a deep echoing thud, the massive ornately carved doors shut behind her and locked. A visible tremor ran through Maria. Her eyes darted around the room, searching frantically, until they finally settled on a figure seated in the shadows, draped in all black. "George." She exhaled a shaky breath as if clinging to a lifeline. "George." But her voice was abruptly cut off, like someone whose throat had just been crushed, because at that moment something was thrown out before her. A human body, bloody, mangled beyond recognition. Two towering mercenaries, their dark skin gleaming under the lights, had dragged him in and dumped him there like a sack of meat. The stench of blood was overwhelming. The figure on the ground twitched, a grotesque mass of flesh barely resembling a person. Maria let out a shrill scream. Her knees buckled and she collapsed onto the floor. George's voice, steady as ever, rang out. "Do you recognize him?" Maria's breath hitched. She squinted, trying to make sense of the mutilated body. Then she realized. It was Makoto Wong, the Wong family's sickly, fragile eldest son. The scream in Maria's throat died instantly. She turned wide-eyed to George. You. But George's face remained calm, unmoved, like the still surface of a bottomless lake. He didn't even look at Maria. Instead, his gaze swept over the rest of the pale, trembling people in the hall. Then, in an eerily even tone, he said, "One by one, tell me everything you've done. If not..." His eyes flickered toward the broken, barely breathing corpse at Maria's feet. "His fate will be yours." The words had barely settled before my aunt scrambled to her feet, legs shaking so hard they barely held her up. She blurted out, voice trembling. "Brother-in-law, if I confess everything, you won't kill me, right?" George didn't respond. He only turned the ring on his finger and said coolly, "You should already know whether what you've done deserves death or not." Panic surged in her eyes. "Brother-in-law, I'll tell you everything, I swear. I was the one who convinced Father not to give Willow any money to abandon her. I was the one who framed her for stealing from me, making Father beat her. When you two were dating, I was the one who reported it to the school, almost getting her expelled. When Willow gave birth to David while she was still in recovery, I tried to sneak into your room. But the maid caught me before I could do anything. When she died, I wanted to marry you under the excuse of taking care of David. But I swear I had nothing to do with her death. You know this, right? My father and I, we didn't have the power to reach country F. George gave a slow nod. That's true. He knew that Willow's death had nothing to do with Lisa. He also knew that despite all of Lisa's petty, disgusting schemes, they weren't enough to warrant death. But he could no longer control himself. His jaw clenched as he spat out, "You may not deserve to die. But that tongue of yours is truly revolting." "Brother-in-law," George shut his eyes. Lisa screamed, "David, please save your aunt." As she was dragged away, her eyes locked onto mine, filled with utter despair. I closed my eyes too. Then silence. I thought to myself, at least she would never be able to run her mouth again. Chapter 9. Alicia's face was as pale as toilet paper. But still, she gritted her teeth and stood up. She said, "After you and Willow started dating, she introduced you to me. The moment I saw you, I fell for you. But you never even looked at me properly. I was obsessed with breaking you and Willow up. I thought that if you separated, I'd have a chance. So I kept telling Willow that you were too poor, that you were just an orphan who had been trafficked, that you weren't good enough for her. But she never listened. Instead, she felt even more sorry for you. She treated you even better. Then the Wong family found you and brought you back. Your entire status changed overnight. And I was the one who kept scaring Willow. I told her that now that you were rich, there were plenty of beautiful women who would chase after you, that you would definitely leave her soon. First, she didn't believe me. But I kept repeating it, showing her examples until she was foolish enough to believe it. But still, you didn't break up. Instead, you were about to get married. I was so jealous I was going crazy, but I never wanted Willow to die. I just couldn't understand. Willow and I were just ordinary plain girls. So why was she so lucky? Why did she get to marry a man like you? Why did she get to be loved like that? I stopped fantasizing about being with you. I just wanted her to be separated from you. I just wanted her to become ordinary again, just like me. It was her. It was Maria. Suddenly, Alicia turned, pointing directly at Maria. She tricked me. She told me she had a way to make Willow leave you. I believed her. I was stupid enough to believe her. Tears streamed down Alicia's face as she broke into gut-wrenching sobs. But I never in my worst nightmares, thought she would have Willow killed. If I had known, I would rather die than do this. I stared at Alicia, watching her sob like a broken child. But in my heart, all I thought was, so my first instincts had been right after all. I had never liked her. But my mother always spoke fondly of her. Always remembered how Alicia had once bought her breakfast for an entire semester. She used to say, "Alicia may have a sharp tongue, but she has a kind heart." Back then I had no money for food, I nearly starved. It was Alicia who helped me through it. But my mother didn't know. People change. People always change. Alicia was dragged away. My grandfather, watching it all, was so terrified that he lost control of himself. He had been a middle-aged adulterer who abandoned his wife and daughter. He wasn't exactly the worst of the worst. Just a small man who had a little money and indulged in pleasure as he pleased. My grandmother had been driven to her grave because of him. My mother suffered endlessly in her youth because of him. And yet, the moment her body had gone cold, he had eagerly pushed his beloved younger daughter forward, wanting her to become my stepmother. I hated him. But now, looking at his trembling, aging figure, his hair fully grayed, his face twisted in fear, I felt something I couldn't name. A deep, wordless sadness. A hollow sense of loss. If my mother were still alive, she, soft-hearted and kind as she was, probably wouldn't have even hated him. Chapter 10. The hall grew emptier and emptier. Eventually, the remaining people were strangers to me. It was my father who told me that every last one of them had once tormented my mother. By the end, only Maria remained. She was deathly pale, standing frozen in terror. And beside her, 6 skulls, specially treated and preserved. The 6 people who had murdered my mother. Maria's voice was hoarse as she asked, "George, when did you know?" George lowered his gaze, brushing his thumb over the ring on his 4th finger. He said, "The moment you suggested that I marry you. That day in the hospital." Maria's breath hitched. "Why?" George slowly lifted his eyes to meet hers. His gaze was dark, so dark that it felt like a dried-up well, one that had long been abandoned, utterly lifeless. He said, "Because after you spoke, I suddenly remembered something Willow once told me." Maria swallowed, her throat dry. What did she say? George's expression softened slightly, as though he had been pulled into a distant memory. He spoke quietly. When Willow gave birth to David, she lost a lot of blood. She was weak, barely hanging on. When she woke up, she looked at David and whispered to me, "George, you know, before I lost consciousness I kept thinking, if I were to die, the only person I'd trust to take care of you and David is Marita." His voice was calm, measured. "You remember, don't you, Maria? You walked in just as she said that." Maria's face turned an unnatural shade of white. "That's it?" she asked. "That's what made you think I was guilty? You pinned everything on me just because of that." She let out a sharp, unsteady laugh, her voice shaking. "George, where's your proof? Do you have evidence? Do you have any real proof that I was the one who orchestrated all of this?" George let out a low chuckle. "You're very smart, Maria. You covered your tracks well, made sure to keep yourself clean. You led me to suspect Anna first because the Sue family has ties to the underworld. They have business in multiple countries. It made them the most obvious suspects. In the beginning, I did suspect her. After all, Anna did once tell Willow she'd have her sold overseas. But I quickly realized that Anna wasn't the mastermind." Maria clenched her fists. "How? How can you be so sure? With the Sue family's power, they could have erased every trace of their involvement." George's voice remained steady. "If the Sue family had truly done it, they wouldn't have still insisted on marrying their daughter into my family. Maria, do you really think Anna's father, an experienced, shrewd man who has weathered countless storms, would ever push his own daughter into the arms of a man whose wife his family had murdered?" His footsteps were slow as he approached her. When he reached her, he raised his foot and pressed it down on Maria's trembling fingers. "You thought leaving yourself 2 scapegoats would be enough to keep you safe. You thought Makoto and Anna would take the fall for you, shielding you forever." His voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that made the air suffocating. "The moment I saw you sneaking out of Makoto's villa in disguise that night, I already knew what had happened. Makoto adored you, worshipped you, but he also knew he could never truly have you, never give you the life you wanted. So he let himself be used by you, willingly becoming your puppet. He spent his last breath trying to protect you, taking all the blame onto himself. But Maria, you are cold, ruthless, poisonous. You never deserved that kind of loyalty. You destroyed him." George lifted his foot and kicked Maria's shoulder, sending her crashing backward. His voice turned ice-cold. "Every ounce of suffering Willow endured, I will return to you 100-fold, 1,000-fold." He flicked his hand, and immediately several men stepped forward, binding Maria's limbs tightly. Maria thrashed violently. "Punish the ones responsible, not me. Willow was a fool. Alicia lured her out, Makoto paid the money, and those 6 executed it. They're dead, George. You killed every last one of them." She glared at him, spitting venom. "I had nothing to do with it. How was I supposed to know Makoto had feelings for me? How was I supposed to know he would commit such a crime just to please me? And don't forget, without me you'd never be where you are today. The Kim family invested in you. I invested in you. If you lay a finger on me, you'll ruin everything you've built." George let out a quiet laugh. "You're right. My success today was partially built on your and the Kim family's support. But tell me, Maria, do you really think I, George Wong, care about success?" Maria's eyes widened in horror. "You're insane," she shrieked. "Willow is dead. The entire Wong family belongs to you now. Soon even half of the Kim family will be yours. You have the power to rule everything, to control everything. And you're going to throw it all away for a corpse? Is it worth it?" George's voice was calm, unwavering. "For a woman like you? Of course not. But for Willow." His lips curled into a faint, bitter smile. "For Willow, I would walk through fire and knives, die 1,000 deaths, and I would still do it willingly." Chapter 11. That night on the deep-sea cruise ship, Maria's screams echoed throughout most of the night. It is said that each of her 10 fingers was severed one by one. Her bones were broken inch by inch. Someone used a very small sharp knife to slice the flesh off her body piece by piece. Her eyes were the last to be gouged out, so she could watch her body being grotesquely disfigured. In the end, she was burned alive in a raging fire. Her charred corpse was thrown into the open sea. After all this, George abandoned the mess and took me back to the country. As for how much effort the Sue family had to put into cleaning everything up, that was none of our concern. Before coming, my father had negotiated with the Sue family. As long as they handled the aftermath cleanly, he would make peace with them once and for all. Maria, who had gone abroad, mysteriously disappeared. At the same time, Makoto, the eldest son of the Wong family, also vanished under strange circumstances. George and the Sue family searched abroad for 3 months. In the end, a maritime search and rescue team recovered debris containing Maria's DNA. They also salvaged a severed limb from which Makoto's DNA was extracted. A foreign sailor claimed that he had once seen the two secretly meeting on the deck in the dead of night. Later, an argument broke out. Makoto even laid a hand on Maria. The sailor had wanted to intervene, but someone pulled him away. Beyond that, he wasn't sure what happened. In short, the deaths of these two seemed to be nothing more than a tragic accident from a lover's quarrel. When the news spread back home, everyone in our circle was shocked. No one had imagined that Maria and Makoto had such an affair, nor that Maria, while so close to George, was secretly involved with Makoto. Greedy for both, she ended up with nothing, completely erased from existence. A lamentable fate. The Kim family did not believe Maria's death was an accident, but with no evidence, they had no choice but to accept it. From then on, the Kim family began a long streak of misfortune. Within just 5 years, they, once a prominent name in wealthy circles, vanished without a trace. Rumors said that the younger generation of the Kim family was utterly incompetent. It was only a matter of time before their remaining fortune was squandered. I heard that Anna had fully recovered from her illness. She never dreamed of my mother again. My father divorced her. She happily returned to the Sue family. Over the past year, perhaps out of a vow to my mother's ghost to take good care of me, she had truly devoted herself. In doing so, she seemed to have developed genuine affection. Every few days, she would come back to see me, but only when my father was not home. If they happened to run into each other, she would flee faster than a rabbit. On the first anniversary of my mother's death, I noticed my father's left hand wrapped in thick gauze. Later, when the gauze was removed, his ring finger was missing. The wound was so neat, it could not have been accidental. He took me to my mother's grave once. There were signs that the grave had been disturbed. I immediately understood. My father must have buried the only remaining severed finger that had once belonged to both him and my mother. When I turned 18, George already had a head full of white hair. Over the years, he worked himself to the bone. He never allowed anyone to help him. He personally handled everything while taking care of me. I inherited my father's appearance. But my eyes, they looked more and more like my mother's. He often stared into them in a daze. Sometimes he would murmur a name, Willow. But she had been gone for 13 years. At first, people encouraged him to remarry. But as time passed, no one ever mentioned it again. Chapter 12. The year we returned from F country, we weren't alone. With us came a girl 2 years younger than me. My father gave her a name, Sophia. She was an orphan, but her background was clean. Her origins without any entanglements. My father had carefully selected her from nearly 100 children to stay by my side, to be my companion. After coming back, I gradually started to speak again, especially when I was with Sophia. Because deep down, I always felt that we were alike. Only those who carry the same wounds can find warmth in each other's embrace. I had no mother, but I still had a father who loved me more than anything. But when he was 3, both of his parents had died. We loved lying on the rooftop, whispering to each other, sharing a pain only we could understand. We couldn't tell anyone else, but we could tell each other. In the blink of an eye, over 10 years passed. I turned 20 and Sophia was 18. My father had raised her well, so well. I liked her very much. When I graduated from university at 22, I slowly started taking over the company's affairs. Later, when Sophia finished school and could help me, George finally let go. Then, as I handled several difficult business matters on my own, my father completely handed everything over. In my spare time, I studied antique restoration. Oh, I almost forgot, back then both my mother and Maria had studied this. But my mother always had the upper hand, however slightly. Their mentor once said, "Willow's heart is calmer, her hand steadier. Maria is always just a little lacking. She should follow Willow more and learn from her." Perhaps this was one of the reasons Maria had my mother's fingers severed one by one. When I entrusted the company's finances to Sophia, Anna came running to me countless times. She even tried to persuade me with heartfelt concern. "David, how can you let a woman manage your money? What if you ever need to go to court and can't access your own funds? Sophia is just your father's adopted daughter. Even if she were your real sister, don't families still fight to the death over inheritances? You mustn't be careless. Your father and mother only had one son, you. You can't just let the Wong family's fortune fall into someone else's hands. Anna and I have a good relationship now." Hearing her say this, I acted spoiled and teased her. "But Anna, you're still here. If Sophia ever has any bad intentions, you can sell her off to another country too." At that, Anna frowned even more, sighing. "I was born a pampered young lady who never had to lift a finger. I never planned to take over any family business, never wanted to worry about anything. I was just going to spend money recklessly my whole life. So why is it that now, in middle age, my burdens are heavier than ever?" Her exaggerated frustration made me laugh. I joked, "Anna, don't you think being a powerful, unstoppable villainess sounds pretty cool?" She seriously considered it, as if a little tempted. Then she reached out and stroked my hair for a long time. Suddenly, her eyes turned red. She was about to cry again. I gently hugged her. I understood. So many years had passed. Fewer and fewer people still remembered my mother. Even my aunt had stopped secretly cursing her under her breath. My grandfather, after suffering a stroke, had been dead for years. His last 2 years were spent bedridden. With no one to care for him, he developed severe bedsores and suffered terribly. They say in the end he longed only for death to free him. And then there was Alicia. She later married a disabled man. Her life wasn't easy. When he was in a bad mood, he drank. And when he drank, he hit her and cursed her. But she kept having children one after another. Divorce was never an option. The dead will never return. The living continue to struggle. But it's okay. I have my father. I have Anna. And there are even strangers I don't know. People who still remember my mother. Her grave is never without fresh flowers. Her mentor visits often. The man she loved most misses her with every second that passes. And her beloved son. I will fulfill the dream she never had the chance to complete. And then there's Anna. My mother probably never expected that in the end the one person who would always remember her, always think of her, would be Anna. The one who would protect me in her place. Chapter 13. A year after I graduated, my father arranged a wedding for me and Sophia. When we knelt before him to offer our respects, he smiled, so gently, so deeply. Yet there was a quiet sense of release in his expression. At that moment, an ominous feeling gripped my heart. After the wedding, I refused to leave his side, staying close to him at all times. But on the anniversary of my mother's death, he still left. Perhaps he feared my grief, feared that his own heart would soften and waver. So he did not allow me to be there for his final moments. He only left me a letter. The letter read, "David, forgive me. Your mother is too lonely on her own. I must go be with her. When I die, cremate me. Burn me to ashes and take me to the place where your mother passed away. Scatter my ashes there. I'm going to find her. I'm going to find my Willow. David, your father is happy. In this moment I am happier than I have been in the past 18 years. So let me go, will you, David? Will you send me off yourself?" Clutching the letter, I collapsed to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. Sophia did not say a word. She simply stayed beside me quietly, just like she always had. She was my shadow, my constant companion, my safe harbor. She was the one who made me feel at peace. I took my father's ashes to the place where my mother had died. The landfill no longer looked the same, no longer filthy, no longer chaotic. I found my way back to where it all had happened. With trembling hands, I scattered his ashes, letting them drift into the wind. Sophia held my hand the entire time, never letting go. That night I had a beautiful dream. In my dream, my father was young and handsome again, his hair still jet black. My mother was radiant, soft and warm, her smile as sweet as ever. They were holding my hands as I stumbled forward, just learning to walk. I tripped and fell, then ran toward them again. My father lifted me high, placing me on his shoulders. My mother was laughing. She kept laughing. And when my father looked at her, his eyes were filled with nothing but love. In my dream, I must have been crying because when I woke up, my pillow was soaked through. Beside me, Sophia whispered softly, "David, I will stay with you, forever." Chapter 14. In the 3rd year of our marriage, Sophia became pregnant. When the time came for her to give birth, Anna arrived at the hospital with nearly 100 bodyguards surrounding the building inside and out. She had truly become a fierce, battle-hardened queen. The sight of it made Sophia feel completely safe. She gave birth smoothly to a pair of twins, a boy and a girl. We named them Georgios Wang and Sylvie Liu. Not just my decision, Sophia and I chose the names together. Each child carried one of our last names. Sophia said, "I was once an orphan, nameless and rootless. I only wish for my parents to rest in peace wherever they are." When the twins turned 1 month old, Sophia and I took them to the cemetery. At my parents' graves, roses bloomed in full splendor. The wind carried their fragrance, filling the air with a gentle, intoxicating scent. Among the vibrant flowers, I seemed to catch a glimpse of my parents, George and Willow, young and full of life once more. They say that kind souls will be reborn into good families, destined for a life of warmth and abundance. My parents must have already been reborn into such a place. Somewhere they are being cherished, held close, loved deeply. And if I too have a next life, I would still want to be their son. If there truly is a next life, then in that lifetime the 3 of us will never be apart again.